The movie begins with a man named Billy Beane, who is the manager of the American Baseball League's Oakland Athletics. Because his squad was defeated by the New York Yankees in the 2001 season, Beane was compelled to face a hard reality. Given that the Yankees were a wealthy team with star players while the Athletics was a weak, tiny team with little financial assistance, the loss was not entirely unexpected. Even though he had anticipated the defeat, it was still difficult for him to accept because he had high expectations for his squad. 3 players from Beane's squad had to be cut after that defeat because they had been signed by another club and would not return the following year. The departure of his key players raised concerns about the performance of his squad. Beane then addressed the situation with the team's owner in an attempt to enhance the team's performance by requesting more money to replace the departing players with new, top-tier players. The conflict was unavoidable. On the one hand, Beane demanded autonomy and additional funding to help his team, while the owner urged Beane to refrain from overspending the club's finances because Athletics was not a wealthy organization. Beane began looking for a replacement for his star player on his own after feeling that his request for financing had failed. During this process, Beane encountered several rejections when he tried to recruit his target player. After his final attempt at recruitment was unsuccessful, Beane eventually met Peter Brand, a player analyst. Peter evaluates players using the numbers he obtains from intricate calculations based on the player's statistics, as opposed to most analysts, who evaluate players based on their skills on the pitch. After a thorough explanation, Beane eventually grasped the reasoning behind Brand's peculiar method of evaluating the players they scouted and decided to hire him as the team's advisor. At first, Beane questioned the method. Following that, Peter and Beane began searching for 3 new, inexpensive athletes to meet his team's subpar finances. Peter explained his odd but worthwhile vision. Peter talked about some benched players who were hardly ever used by their prestigious teams, beginning with players with poor pitching abilities, players with a slow pace, and old players. Even though no team was interested in signing the players Peter was after, he remained convinced that these undesirables could develop into stars if only their team could recognize their true potential. As a result of his belief in Peter's assessment, Beane agreed and was prepared to present their proposal to the other club officials. As expected, the authorities didn't like their suggestions and were annoyed that the 2 of them wanted to add bad players at a time when the team's record was slipping. They also believed Peter's evaluation, which was solely focused on figures, to be delusional nonsense. During the heated exchange, Beane clarified that Athletics required an entirely novel approach if they intended to rise to the occasion and perform admirably the following season because the same strategy was no longer viable. Everyone was compelled to execute the strategy because Beane was the club's head manager, and no one could forbid him from doing what he desired. Based on Peter's report, Beane eventually began bargaining with the new players. Despite their hectic routine, Beane found moments to spend with his daughter, who turned out to be a talented singer. His daughter's singing relieved his tension and inspired him to work harder. Beane used to be a stellar student who received a scholarship to a prestigious institution back then. But one day, an agent for a Major League Baseball team made him an offer after spotting Beane's exceptional talent at a game at his school. He was intrigued by the idea of joining the club and foregoing his education at that time to concentrate on a job after the agent assured him of a promising future in the organization. Beane finally chose to take the offer to play baseball for their club after giving it careful and thorough thought, and he subsequently left his education. Regrettably, reality struck him hard once he was in the actual league game. Since the actual league game was very different from the one at his former school, Beane's accomplishment was not as strong as anticipated. Eventually, Beane became discouraged as his performance deteriorated further. All of the amazing things that his agent had guaranteed him were not even very far from the truth. He was sorry he had ever left his study. He only succeeded in finishing secondary school, though. He did not have a decent job because he only had a high school diploma. Back in the present, Grady Fusen, the head talent scout, once asked Beane to a private meeting. Grady criticized Beane and Peter's approach because, in his opinion, baseball is more about ability and expertise on the pitch than it is about statistics or scientific knowledge. Grady believed that Beane's plan would only exacerbate the team's situation. But Beane appeared to be doubling down and was adamant about his and Peter's plan. The disagreement continued to the point where they began discussing the past and sensitive personal issues. It is disclosed that Grady was the club recruiter who persuaded him to forego his education at the time. Beane was fed up and wanted to fire Grady at that moment. Athletics trained their new players before presenting them to the media at the start of the 2002 season. 3 players were signed by Beane: Chad Bradford, a hurler with an odd delivery, David Justice, 34, and Scott Hatterberg, or Happy, a player with severe hand deformities. The controversy between Art Howe, the chief coach, and these three troublesome athletes began to arise. Athletics, on the other hand, was eventually ready for its first game. Beane had the odd habit of never attending a game while his squad was playing and instead watching it by himself on television. Beane experienced trauma whenever he watched a baseball game in person because of his inability to become a baseball player. He was left with no choice but to wait impatiently for the game's outcome elsewhere. Additionally, Beane was known for keeping a detachment from his players, which allowed him to act quickly to dismiss or trade them when necessary. Numerous individuals made projections before the game even began, and those prophecies came true. Notwithstanding Beane and Peter's tireless efforts, it appeared that Athletics' success was still a mess. Around the same time, Beane and Howe frequently quarreled over who should perform. Beane instructed Howe to play happy, but Howe made a character of his choosing. Although Beane is the general manager, he made it clear that he never enjoyed it when Beane interfered with his duties as head coach. The journalists connected the team's poor performance to Beane and Peter's Moneyball approach to calculating numbers. Beane was blamed by everyone for Athletics' subpar showing. Despite the public outcry, Beane and Peter continued to enjoy their lives. They had faith that, someday, their plan would succeed. When Beane sees his daughter, he cautions her against falling into the speculation circulating about Athletics' demise. To allow the new players to play, Beane had the bright idea to fire Howe's players. Howe threatens to close the club as soon as he discovers what Beane will do next. However, Beane paid Howe no attention at all. Peter then started planning fresh approaches for future games. Peter inspired the team members by speaking with them. Amazingly, the team's performance started to improve, and it moved up the league rankings. Many people were interested in learning how a team with poor performance reached greater heights. Beane intended to bring in great players later. In support of the strategy, he took a variety of actions, such as setting fair rates, deceiving rival teams, and refraining from other clubs from signing the players he had set his sights on. Eventually, Beane was able to con other people, which gave him more hope of achieving the championship. The Athletics team kept winning, and as of now, they have won 6 straight games. The experts questioned how the Moneyball approach functioned. Many people referred to it as a marvel and something unfathomable. The Athletics came very close to breaking the mark for most straight victories in American baseball annals. They were just one victory away from tying the mark of 20 straight victories. Additionally, Beane's ex-wife came up to him and congratulated him on his accomplishments. Despite his team's successful showing, he appeared uneasy. He also went to the game to see his team play in reality. He nevertheless left the stadium out of fear that his team would lose the game. In a game that was going well, the Athletics' play abruptly declined. The turning point came when the rival squad pulled even and caught up. The commentators expected the rival team to annihilate the Athletics and prevent them from breaking the mark. Regrettably, Beane was alone and upset as he watched his team's subpar effort in the closing stages of the game. Howe eventually considered Beane's Moneyball approach while he was watching the game in the stadium and allowed Beane's players to join in. Howe appointed Happy as the batter. Surprisingly, Happy swung the ball in the direction of the enthusiastic audience, and they all rose to their feet to celebrate the Athletics' unexpected victory. The Athletics broke a record that no team had ever set in the 103 years since the American Baseball League began. Happiness was evident all over, but oddly, Beane didn't seem particularly pleased about it. Beane was concerned about how his squad would perform in the upcoming semifinal game. His concern wasn't unfounded. Although his team had broken a record, the league wasn't yet over. So if they lost the next match, they would be out of the competition instantly. And the incident from last season, when they failed to win the league, would repeat itself. Even worse, Beane had a premonition that he would lose his job if the Athletics didn't win the league that year. To cut it short, the time for the pivotal game eventually arrived. Regrettably, Athletics suffered a terrible loss and was kicked out of the competition. They were unable to win the championship. Beane experienced intense frustration and worry following that defeat because his job as team manager was in jeopardy. Fortunately, what Beane feared did not come to pass because it turned out that the club's owner prolonged Beane's term. The club owner permitted him to manage Athletics the following year. Soon after, Beane also got a job management opportunity from the Boston Red Sox. To hire him, the club chairman was willing to pay him a salary of $12.5 million, making Beane the most costly baseball manager ever hired. The chairman of the Red Sox admitted that his desire for Beane was motivated by his ability to lead the team and assemble a competitive squad on a meager budget. The owner of the Red Sox was also attracted to Beane's Moneyball approach, but after giving it some thought, Beane chose to decline the offer. He had a secret passion for athletics. He had previously performed poorly for that team while a player, but now he was a manager. He was not going to give up until Athletics had won the league. After much deliberation with Peter, whom he regarded as a close buddy, Beane ultimately decided to turn down the alluring offer from the Red Sox and stick with the Athletics. Following that, Beane drove his vehicle while enjoying a song that his daughter had written for her adored father. There, the film concludes. If you like our video, kindly subscribe our channel and press the bell icon so that you don't miss our new video. Thanks.